by standing at the door and denying access to AHS and peace officers and even Edmonton City Police when they came. For the most part, they were respectful as well. They would come, we would have a dialogue, and they would request access. And I would say, respectfully, I simply can't do that. Our services have begun. And that started the chain of events that leads us to where we are, which is 13 counts of obstruction, 1 OHS ticket, 2 health orders. I think that's it. Most of it, thankfully, has now been rescinded. We're left with only the charges against myself. The obstruction charges against the church have been dropped. The occupational health and safety ticket has been withdrawn. So we're believing for a favorable outcome one way or another. April 19, I get to go to court, and hopefully we'll see another victory there.
So in this one, I'm not going to be asking to strike down the obstruction provision in the Public Health Act. That's pretty standard in a lot of legislation. But I'm just simply going to be putting up other charter defenses and just the plain old defense of, well, she didn't actually obstruct anybody. So that's going to trial on April 19th. And I look forward to doing that. Tracy's a great client, and I think it's going to be a fun couple of days in court.
Warning, censorship.
Sheila Gunn Reid for Rebel News, and I'm here giving you an update to one of my favorite stories of the lockdown. Even though the lockdown has been treacherous, I've been able to meet some really wonderful people, including Rodney and Tracy Fortin here at Church in the Vine in Edmonton. You two and your church were really some of the very first lockdown resisting churches. You just sort of went about your business here at Church in the Vine. You made restrictions sort of optional. And you did not let the government interrupt your church services, which is how you came on my radar. And Tracy, you actually were the bad guy in all of this. If you asked the government, you ended up with a series of charges for obstructing the government when the government tried to break the law and interrupt your church services, right?
Exactly. They were just that. They were trying to break the law, coming to the front door and all but demanding access during our worship services. And we simply said, Section 176 of the Criminal Code. We stood on that one over and over and over, very politely, without being rude, and said, I'm sorry, come back another time, but not during our worship service.
And the case of Church in the Vine has been going on so long that your lawyer actually left the Justice Center, but you like your lawyer and we like your lawyer, so we thought, we'll just absorb your case into fightthefines.com. So now James Kitchen, your lawyer, is helping you, but through fightthefines.com. So people who have been donating to Fight the Fines to help Tracy and Rodney, that's still going because Tracy is still in trouble, but we'll get to that in a little bit here. During the lockdown, you two have sort of been helping other people navigate the lockdown. You've been writing exemption letters for people so that they could keep their education and their careers.
Yeah, that's right. We made a decision that we would help people because it was within our power to do so. People were coming to us saying, we're losing our jobs. Can you help us? Because a lot of people said that they'd receive restriction or the religious exemption letters. And so we started to write those. We've written thousands of them. And many people have got to keep their jobs and they were allowed to continue in their school because of the letters. And so we've been happy to help people. And that's really something that we could do during this time to help.
And ultimately, at the end, that's really been a blessing for your church because your church has grown. We were saying off camera, the church thrives in persecution. I would say the church has been completely persecuted by the government for being obedient to the word of God and the laws of God over the laws of man. But on the flip side, the church has grown. People are finding comfort and support here at Church in the Vine.
People today, more than ever, need truth. And I think there's just been something stirred in the hearts of people like never before, or at least not for a long time, where they're beginning to discern between life and death in a greater way. And COVID has really brought such a heaviness, and there's death and lies and destruction everywhere. So their yearning for something true and life-giving has really been evident. And even writing letters, just a tangible way to love them and letting them in the door to come and worship together. The overwhelming sense of love and connection and acceptance has really blown the doors wide open.
Yeah, I'm kind of reminded of a story too. I got a pastor. I've got to hit the story here.
Yeah.
There's a story about 3 Hebrew boys. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And a lot of people know about the story, but they were told to bow down to a statue. And when we liken the statue to a modern day concept, we liken it to the tyranny that we're dealing with now. And they were told to bow, and they didn't. And because of that, they were thrown into the fire. And what people don't realize is that there are 2 things. One is that when they didn't bow, there was a whole nation of Hebrews that were actually bowing. And so many, even in the church in this season, have bowed as well. And so we've been encouraging people to stand and not to bow to that tyranny. And the second thing, what people don't realize, they say, well, where was God in the midst of all this? When you chose to stand, where was God? And in the same way that there was a 4th man in the midst of the fire, God has actually shown himself, and he's been in the midst of this with us. And over, we've been blessed in every single way because we made the decision to say yes to God and no to this, really what I want to call evil. It's not right. And so I continue to challenge churches to say, you know what, listen, you say yes to God, no matter what God is saying to you, and don't bow down to this. It's just really, God's going to bless you. He really will.
Tracy used the word discernment, and I think for a lot of Christians, they are seeing that their own churches, unfortunately, have let them down when they needed their churches the most. Pastor Art describes himself as a frontline worker during the pandemic, and I think that's one of the reasons your church has grown is because so many people are disaffected and let down by their own church, and they're finding support in yours.
That's absolutely right. Like I said, there's a yearning inside of us for that truth and the connection and life. We were made to thrive. We're made to thrive, and we need each other to do that, and we need to continue to be obedient to what God has called us to do. And the proof is in the pudding, right? We've continued to not just say no to the government, but even more important than that, we've said yes to the mandate that God has on us. And he, in turn, has proved faithful day after day after day.
Pastor Rodney, you have not, I wouldn't say you've been critical of other pastors, but you have vocally called on them to support their flock.
Yeah, I continue to do that. Like we've had actually people that have written us saying that our pastors want our people to be double vaccinated or not to come back to church. And I'm thinking, for starters, I don't see Jesus doing that. And so in that way, I would say my heart would want to reach out to the people for starters and love them, and also to bring a little bit of correction where needed. I don't see Jesus functioning that way. And I've heard them also say that Jesus would get vaccine to love people. And I would say the other side, I would say that Jesus would speak the truth to love people. And so for me, it's more about truth. And sometimes walking in truth means that we go against the grain. And so for me, that's the side and the choice that we took. Listen, I'm not here to be critical toward any pastor or any leader, but at the same time, if I can challenge some to begin to just re-examine maybe some of these motives and re-look at things. I've even heard of some pastors and leaders, because they've taken some funds from the government, that they haven't wanted to stand against the government because maybe their churches were going to close. But I got to tell you that because we stood and stayed open, our budget's more than 3 times what it was a year ago, and we've planted 2 new churches. And this is not a time to shrink back. This is a time to increase and expand.
Yeah, these pastors can have their open doors, but they're empty pews, I suppose. And with regard to Jesus would take the vaccine, maybe he would, maybe he wouldn't, but he wouldn't make everybody else do it at the tip of the Roman sword. Tracy, I wanted to ask you, why don't you give us a Coles Notes version of how you ended up an outlaw?
Well, pretty much just by standing at the door and denying access to AHS and peace officers and even Edmonton City Police when they came. For the most part, they were respectful as well. They would come, we would have a dialogue, and they would request access. And I would say, respectfully, I simply can't do that. Our services have begun. And that started the chain of events that leads us to where we are, which is 13 counts of obstruction, 1 OHS ticket, 2 health orders. I think that's it. Most of it, thankfully, has now been rescinded. We're left with only the charges against myself. The obstruction charges against the church have been dropped. The occupational health and safety ticket has been withdrawn. So we're believing for a favorable outcome one way or another. April 19, I get to go to court, and hopefully we'll see another victory there.
Tracy, I'm going to cover that like the OJ trial.
Oh,
I am. And I think a part of the story here too is when police and when Alberta Health Services couldn't get in the door, then they tried to get tricky and use occupational health and safety because this is a workplace and not a church. And so they tried to get in that way and slapped you with an enormous administrative penalty. And a normal person would have paid it, but not you guys. We sent it to the lawyer and they got that withdrawn.
Yeah, they absolutely did. They requested access to our work site. At the time, we had 2.5 employees here in our work site. Not altogether sure what they were hoping to find. There's no oil spills. There's no chemicals. There's nobody hanging out of windows.
I didn't even see a ladder.
I don't know if we even own anything beyond a stepladder. But we wised up to the scheme. And so what we did was we closed our office place during the week. And we've worked from home then for several months. That eliminated the need for them to come and inspect. But they didn't like that. So yeah, they did impose a $5,000 administrative penalty because we wouldn't let them come and inspect during the day. That ended up after our appeal. James, wonderful. We've loved working with our lawyer. After the appeal, they sent us a letter saying, thank you, essentially, not quoted, but essentially, thank you, Church in the Vine, for letting us come and inspect your building.
Which you didn't.
We did not.
Yeah.
We now find you in compliance. Thank you for being reasonable. We're going to go ahead and rescind that ticket for you.
That sure is odd, isn't it?
I find it completely suspicious. Not that we found the government to be suspicious during the season. There's been a lot of shady, underhanded things being done. And
we didn't question it though.
Yeah.
No.
We'll let it go.
Yeah, sometimes we just have to roll with it and make decisions on the fly. But we've really had to sometimes be creative during this time because you just don't know. I mean, really, in a sense, it's been a fight for the church's existence in Canada to keep the doors open and keep things going for a lot of churches. I mean, for our church, we've been so blessed during this time, and we're thankful to God. We give glory to Him, and we're going to continue to move forward.
I just think about the enormous legal jeopardy that the church, but also Tracy personally, you guys have been under without the help of James and through fightthefines.com. That's the registered Canadian charity with the Democracy Fund that is helping Tracy and Rodney fight their tickets and fines and charges in court. Without that would have taken an enormous bite out of the good work you're able to do here at Church in the Vine.
Yeah, truthfully, lawyer costs are generally quite high, especially when you're going into litigation of this sort, and it's a long time, and so it could have cost multiple thousands of dollars, and I'm sure it has, and so it's a real big deal for us to have this covered by you guys, and also to have James Kitchen as our lawyer. He's a dynamic lawyer, and we've just loved working with him.
He's a true believer in the fight for freedom, isn't he?
Yeah.
He is so passionate. I didn't know anybody could be as passionate for constitutional freedoms as we are, but he absolutely has been. Yeah.
Now, after I'm done with you, I'll throw to an interview that I did earlier with James from his home office. But before I get out of your hair, because this is a very busy, growing church, thanks to them being open while others were closed, Pastor Rodney, I want to get maybe a prediction from you about what the future will bring, not just for your church, but for Canada, as restrictions are being lifted here locally, but basically with Trudeau declaring war on his own citizens.
Well, I think that probably one of the worst administrative decisions in the history of Canada was to do what he did yesterday. And that's I was going to call it the War Measures Act, but the Emergency Measures Act. By instituting that, or by bringing that in, especially for those that are trying to peacefully protest in Ottawa and different places in the country. I think it was the worst administrative decision he's made, and I think that's going to be the end of his prime ministership, if you want to call it that. And I think we're going to see a shift in government. We're expecting that. We've been praying and contending for that. We recognize that this has been a regime in Canada that's been evil in most cases, and I just want to call it out for what it is. We've been praying. The Bible says we're supposed to pray for our governments, and we do that regularly. And so we're expecting that that's going to shift and change. We're expecting things to return to normal. We're hoping, I guess our hope is that we'll never be here again the way we are. We're not expecting it to go quickly, but in the same sense, we're expecting things to change.
Rodney, from your lips to God's ears. What I do know going forward, though, is that no matter what happens, Church in the Vine is going to be this little oasis of normalcy in a crazy, crazy world if restrictions do come back. I know you two are just going to carry on as normal.
Yeah, absolutely. There's no going back. We're going to continue to press in. There's a kingdom to be built, and God's given us a mission and a mandate for Canada and for the city of Edmonton, and we're going to continue to build regardless.
Tracy, last word goes to you.
I don't like the word normal, returning back to normal, because the truth is, as a church, as a couple, as a family, we don't want to go back to even to what we had a couple of years ago, because that would be to eliminate all of the good, all of the growth, all of the advancement that has been made in the last couple of years. So I don't know what word I would use instead, but I think we're going to come back. Oh, I don't want to quote Joe Biden.
No.
But we're going to come back in a bigger, better way. I truly do believe that the best is yet to come, and we're just getting started.
Okay, as promised, you're going to hear from James Kitchen. He's the incredible lawyer who has been working so hard for Tracy and Rodney and all the congregants at Church in the Vine from the very beginning. And he's been doing it all through your generous donations to the registered Canadian charity, the Democracy Fund. So when you donate to fight the fines to help Tracy and Rodney, that money goes to the registered Canadian charity, the Democracy Fund, and you get a charitable tax receipt for it. Anyway, let's hear from James.
So we had a case conference in the fall, and there was an issue about, because there was originally 6 charges, 3 to just the church, and then 3 to Pastor Tracy Vorton and the church. Those last 3 were the 3 obstruction charges, because she wouldn't let, Tracy wouldn't let the AHS officers into the church. But the latter 3 were the typical, you're not following restrictions, you're having too many people kind of things, right? The same stuff that all the other churches got charged with a year and a half ago. And I kept asking the Crown prosecutor, look, I need to know, I need to know the particulars of this case, right? Because one of the charter rights at play always in any criminal case like this or regulatory case is, what's the case to be met, right? I can't have full answer in defense if I don't know what I'm answering. So she wouldn't give me any particulars. And so the judge said, all right, well, you got to give some particulars. So eventually we had a case conference here a couple weeks ago, and instead of giving me particulars, she just decided to drop those 3 charges against the church. Okay. So, which I actually thought was a little bit surprising, but obviously I was happy to see that. What I expected I was going to have to do there is challenge the particular capacity restrictions or whatever restrictions it was that she was charging the church under. That was what I needed particulars for. I didn't know what the charges actually were. This whole, 73 sub 1 of the Public Health Act, right? Like it's insidious because you never actually know what that really means, right? And it's of course a sign of a state that's devolving into authoritarianism, that you end up getting charged with things without actually knowing what those charges are. Right. And so instead of giving me the particulars and going ahead with the charges, she dropped them, which I thought was pretty significant. So now all she's going after, the Crown prosecutor in this case, is the obstruction charges, which are interesting. Your typical constitutional case in the constitutional. So in this one, I'm not going to be asking to strike down the obstruction provision in the Public Health Act. That's pretty standard in a lot of legislation. But I'm just simply going to be putting up other charter defenses and just the plain old defense of, well, she didn't actually obstruct anybody. So that's going to trial on April 19th. And I look forward to doing that. Tracy's a great client, and I think it's going to be a fun couple of days in court.
Now, this is not the first time that when you've asked the other side to show their work, they just said, you know what, never mind, we just won't. The same thing sort of happened with the occupational health and safety angle that the government tried. All of a sudden, even though they were not allowed in to inspect the church, they sent a letter saying, yeah, we definitely inspected it and everything's fine. Don't worry, let's just forget this all happened. This is the second time this has happened.
Yep. This is why it's so, lawyers and the media are just so fundamentally important to the functioning of a free and democratic and transparent society, right? It's just how it works. And if you don't have that, it's just a foregone conclusion that you will devolve into an authoritarian, unaccountable nation or society. And that's exactly what's going on in Canada, is we got this tension between, do we stay free or do we devolve into an authoritarian society, right? And media like the Rebel and lawyers like all the lawyers you got and lawyers like me play a role in hopefully preventing that from happening, because it's only through lifting the rock, right, and revealing all the cockroaches that you keep your society clean of all those cockroaches. And I'm sorry, the cockroaches typically come in through government and state overreach and bureaucracies and crap. That's how it gets in, right? And this is how you keep that at bay, is by doing precisely this. And this is not unusual. When you sue the government on a regular basis like I do, this type of behavior is not unusual. It's just how it goes, right? So it's great that we can do it this way. I mean, it's also great when we go to court and do it that way too, right? But this is how it works.
James Kitchen has been getting some incredible success for Tracy and Rodney and Church in the Vine, but he's still got so much more work left to do. If you'd like to donate to help offset their ballooning legal fees as Tracy and Rodney fight for religious freedom against the state, please consider donating at fightthefines.com. And all donations to Fight the Fines qualify for a charitable tax receipt through the registered Canadian charity, the Democracy Fund.